Okay, I'll come back the next round. The first question, the two parts. The second part is extremely difficult to explain and to even have time to discuss it. But the first part was about, since 9/11, Israel is increasingly being seen as an asset in fighting jihadists, radical Islam. With all the Islamophobia spreading, Israel is increasingly seen as the forefront. So if we don't want to send American soldiers to fight those Muslim nutcases, the argument goes, well, let's send Israel to do what it's supposed to do. Why are we feeding them with tons of money to do this dirty work for us? So how has that been challenged? Has that been changing? And how is the BDS movement dealing with it? The second part was about Syria, Iraq, Iran, and what's happening in the region. How is that affecting the BDS movement? Okay, the first part, I think, has changed in the last few years quite radically. Since 9/11, yes, certainly, Israel became the darling of the West like no other time. I mean, it became, the partnership became much, much deeper after 9/11, absolutely. The propaganda machine of Israel worked overtime to present Israel as the front state against barbarism, Islamic barbarism now. It used to be communism. Again, Israel presented itself as the front state fighting communism. If Israel allows communism to spread in the Arab world, the US is finished. So invest in us. Now it's the next red threat, which is coming, a green threat, coming from Islam this time, radical Islam, supposedly. However, this has been really undermined in the last number of years. First, Israel's war on Lebanon, 2006, was a very, very important earthquake in the American establishment's trust in Israel's ability to do the job. Until 2006, I think the US establishment had total faith in Israel's ability to wipe out any enemy, any group that the US considered threatening. 2006 was Israel's first military defeat in its history. It was never defeated militarily except in 2006 at the hands of Hezbollah. The pure data, military data, shows that they were defeated. Yes, they devastated Lebanon. Yes, 1,000 Lebanese civilians were killed. Yes, the Dahiya, the southern suburb of Beirut, was obliterated. Absolutely. The damage done to Lebanon was enormous, way disproportionate. But Israel lost the war militarily, not just in the media. Militarily, they lost it. They could not achieve any military success, and they were forced to withdraw, literally forced to withdraw. Israel is not used to that. It was never, ever forced to withdraw in the long term. I mean, initially in the 1973 war, they were forced, but then they came back and they took revenge. With 2006, it was their first military defeat in Israel's history. That taught not just Israel a lesson, taught the American planners a lesson. Can we really rely on them? So clearly, the response was, we've got to do our dirty work on our own. Thus, the US actually told Israel, sit on the bench and don't do anything. Because if you get involved in our wars in the region, you'll ruin our chances. A, because you're becoming much less competent. You're not delivering. B, because you'll alienate everyone else. So they've become far less of an asset in the last number of years. This is not since 2001. This has changed in the last number of years. Israel's attacks on Gaza, especially the last one, 2012, did not prove very effective either. Yes, Israel again obliterated Gaza with F-16s and so on, but the little capacities that Palestinian resistance groups had was overwhelming for Israel's tolerance. They just could not tolerate those little missiles that are not extremely effective, but it's such a nuisance that it paralyzed the economy. It paralyzed Israel. Hundreds of thousands started thinking of leaving the country. Today, 50% of Israeli youth dream of leaving the country. 50%. Half the new Israeli generation is dreaming of leaving the country. So they realize that. So they're becoming much less of an asset. The former Mossad chief, a couple of years ago, said, in fact, that we are not seeing the drastic change happening in the United States. We have always been an asset. Now we're largely viewed as a burden. He used that term very clearly. Largely viewed as a burden. Now the chief of Mossad, I trust his analysis because he knows more than anyone else this relationship between the Israeli establishment and the US establishment. Still, not to undermine that important propaganda value of Israel as fighting the jihadists. But where Israel has proven to be effective is in developing weapon systems, more important than weapon systems, doctrines, strategies for urban warfare, and for pushing the envelope on what's legitimate under international law. Tzipi Livni, again, the so-called justice minister in Israel, alleged war criminal, said that very clearly, that yes, disproportionate force and targeting civilians to harm the resistance is illegal now. But wait till we do it and do it and do it over and over again, and we give the US a chance to do it on its own, in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. I mean, the biggest violator of international law is the United States, obviously. I mean, Israel pales in comparison to the crimes committed by the US. But Israel is pushing the envelope on what's acceptable. And here, again, Israeli academics, international law experts are duly playing their role in arguing asymmetric warfare using disproportionate force, and they use the term disproportionate force, is okay, because that's the only effective way to fight terrorists, between quotes. So there, Israel's value is extremely high, and it has not lost that value in pushing this envelope on international law and allowing things that were thought inconceivable, legally inconceivable a few years ago, now are okay, are being discussed. Israel field tests its weapons and sells them to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world jumps on them because they're field tested. Now, the effect of what's happening in Syria especially, and less so in Iraq and Iran, on the Palestinian cause and the BDS movement and so on, is way too complex for me to try to answer. I mean, it would take me 5 minutes to start formulating an intelligent answer, so maybe we can take that offline, if you don't mind. The second question was about cross-movement alliance with African Americans, Latinos, and so on, that we're not doing enough. I don't live in this country, so I wouldn't know, and I trust what you said. And if that's the case, we need to do much more, especially our younger activists, Palestinian activists, Arab activists, and so on, need to see this in a non-opportunistic way. Going and asking people who are deeply, severely oppressed, like the African American community in this country, the Latino community, to just give us solidarity when we don't stand with them as if we are the super victims of the world is immoral, not just opportunistic. It's really immoral. We've got to stand in solidarity, and we were at a meeting, Barbara and I, where people were discussing not solidarity, but joint struggles. Because the enemy is very unified. We're not. They are unified. I mean, hegemonic powers around the world have their G8s and G6s and G whatever, and they coordinate and organize and divide the world among them. We need to get our act together and form those alliances to fight those big hegemonic powers. So I fully agree with you, and I rely more on young activists to push this. One very concrete example in Detroit is the prevalent racism in the Palestinian and Arab merchant community against blacks. That's a very, very serious problem. And I think young activists can help play a role. To fight crime, we cannot and should not criminalize whole communities. That's absolutely immoral, absolutely racist. We should not tolerate that. So I think we need to do that. Maybe joint task forces, Arab-Black joint task forces, to educate and to fight back against racism in a joint way. The last question was something I had mentioned yesterday in Ann Arbor about Israeli academics. I'll explain it. There's an assumption that did I miss the academic freedom part? I missed the academic freedom part.
Yeah, so talk about it now.
No, good. I just remembered I missed something, because I usually don't miss anything, but I missed this one. Okay. It starts with academic freedom, and then I'll come back to the 9,000, because that's exactly where that context comes from. The main accusation against academic boycott is that it infringes the academic freedom of Israelis. Actually, many arrogant US university presidents say it infringes academic freedom, period. Which is worse than saying it infringes academic freedom of Israelis. Because infringing academic freedom, period, means not only that Israelis are the only ones deserving of academic freedom, it means that Palestinians don't exist on the map. Academic freedom is only for the humans, the Israelis. We subhumans, or what I call relative humans, are not even entitled to academic freedom to be considered. So let's look at the situation. You have a colonial power daily denying people their human rights, including freedom of movement, including access to education, including academic freedom, in a very profound way, denying them all these freedoms. And we're not focusing on that denial of academic freedom. We're focusing on the hypothetical impact that the academic boycott of Israel may have on Israeli academics' freedom. So that is important to bring up. When people bring that point up to us, I think it's important to hold the mirror to them and say, how racist can you get? Facing real denial of freedoms, including academic freedom, is ignored, and raising the specter of some hypothetical infringement, and I'll explain why hypothetical, it becomes religious, becomes the obsession of every bureaucrat in an American university. It's hypothetical because the Palestinian campaign for the academic boycott is institutional, which means we target institutional links. We call for boycotting institutions, not individual academics. This means that even if academic boycott were to spread enormously, this will not prevent Israeli academics from teaching, conducting research, attending international conferences, doing what academics do. It will impact their privileges and their perks. So be it, but not their academic freedom. There's nothing in the Palestinian call, which is institutional, that targets academic freedom of Israelis. But again, Israel, in as far back as the Nakba, the 1948 ethnic cleansing, pillaged and destroyed tens of thousands of Palestinian books, as revealed in recent Israeli research at Ben Gurion University. Tens of thousands of books were systematically stolen and destroyed. Not a peep about academic freedom. In the first Intifada, 1987 to 1993, Israel shut down all Palestinian universities, and then all Palestinian schools, and then all Palestinian kindergartens. Palestinian education was deemed illegal, criminal, and Palestinian education went underground, which is a silly term. A teacher or a professor gathering his or her students and going to some church, some mosque, some community center, clandestinely to teach. And the Jerusalem Post at the time had a front page article how some classes were caught at the YMCA in East Jerusalem, apprehended classes, teachers teaching to their pupils. A student held by the army carrying a textbook was held accountable. The textbook was confiscated and the kid was thrown in jail, usually smacked and then let go. So there was a full criminalization of Palestinian education. I mean, the extreme case of denying academic freedom, not a peep from liberal US academics. When Birzeit was shut down for 4 consecutive years, we did not hear much complaint from American academics, except very few principled ones, about the academic freedom of the Palestinians. Why is that? Because, as I said, relative humans are not entitled to full human rights, let alone this luxury of academic freedom. Why would Palestinians need that? They're not full humans after all. In this context, an argument that always comes up, aside from infringing academic freedom, is that the academic boycott hurts the most progressive community in Israel, academics, that are at the forefront of fighting the occupation. Why are Palestinians intent on shooting themselves in the foot? That's how the argument, they're very concerned about our interests, so that's why they ask this question. Thank you, but allow us to explain our interests. In that context, I mentioned that 4 Jewish Israeli professors in 2008 passed a petition that had the following language. It said, we appeal to the Israeli authorities in the territories. They did not call them occupied territories because that would have been offensive. The territories, they asked the Israeli authorities to allow Palestinian students and teachers passage, allow them access at checkpoints to go to their schools and universities, period. No ending the occupation, God forbid, right of return, nothing. Just allow students and faculty the right to pass to their universities and schools. Don't stop them and prevent them from learning or teaching. They sent this petition to all 9,000 Israeli academics, thinking that everyone except the extreme fascists would sign this, right? Because basic academic freedom. Only 407 out of 9,000 signed it. Less than 5%. This is the best indicator we have of the level of morality and decency in the Israeli academia. So the myth created by liberal Zionists that Israeli academics are so progressive, are at the forefront of fighting the occupation and so on, is an absolute falsification of history. There is no proof of it. Absolutely no research, no empirical proof substantiating this fabrication, this claim. They're as guilty as everyone else, and as I said yesterday in Ann Arbor, they're more guilty than everyone else in Israeli society because they know. They know. Not only do they know what they're doing to us, they've created the knowledge, they've created the ethnic cleansing plans, the wall design, the settlements, the architecture, the philosophy, the everything was created in academia in Israel. They are the main force buttressing and protecting this system of injustice against us. So they're guiltier than the rest. So why don't we call for boycotting Israeli academics? Why do we only call for boycotting Israeli institutions? That's the question that should be asked. If they're so guilty, why aren't you calling for a blanket boycott, as South Africans did? The South African academic boycott, people forget, was a blanket boycott against everyone and everything South African. We chose not to on principle because we believe that we do not want to engage in political testing or any McCarthyist type of testing. We do not want to decide who's a good Israeli academic, who's a bad Israeli academic. We don't do that. On principle, we don't do that. We stick to institutions because it's obvious. We can easily prove the complicity, the deep level of complicity of every single Israeli academic institution. So we don't engage in individual boycott on principle. Okay, now that I've cleared the slate, we have to finish. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hold on for a second, please. I only have a couple words to say, and that is to thank Omar for coming and sharing with us his knowledge about this issue and other issues. 2, thank you for coming. 3, we'd like to thank Father Joe Shalhoub and the Basilica of St. Mary for allowing us to use their facility. They heed the place. By the way, we have to leave relatively soon. And also I would like to thank the committee that started this and the sponsors of the event, which is the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights, and then the co-sponsors, which are Friends of Sabil, Detroit chapter and Ann Arbor chapter, and the Jewish Voice for Peace, and the Presbyterian IPM. And we're going to work for the General Assembly coming up meeting in June, very hard on that. And thanks also for Pax Christi. Who else I forgot? Oh yeah, the Lutherans, of course. They say in Arabic, إذا نسيت الحمد فبماذا تصلي, which means if you forgot how to thank God, what's the use of your prayers? I would like to thank Barbara for the beautiful brochure that you made, or the poster, and the students from Michigan State University, Dearborn. Thank you very much for being part of this. And thanks for the Ramallah Club of Detroit for sending the invitation a few times. And also, who else should we thank? Anyway,
You're tough enough.
thanks for whoever participated in this. We'd like to thank you, and I want you to know that many hundreds of emails went out calling for this and for Ann Arbor event. Now, we are going to send an email to all those who received an email to come to this event, what we're going to do next. So we were going to share how we're going to do it, whether it is supporting the General Assembly for the Presbyterians to take the right decision on boycotting Israel, or how to go from here on the BDS issue, and to make it like a household term. What strategy should we follow? So therefore, you will be called very soon, and the people who could not make it today, they will be called very soon to discuss how we're going to do it together. Omar probably will not be with us, but we have enough to go along and to do the next step like some people suggested. Thank you very much again, and then we have to...